Hi, folks. My name is Greg McLawsen. I'm the Affidavit of Support lawyer. I represent green card holders in federal litigation to enforce the USCIS Form I-864 Affidavit of Support. It's been a long time since I made a YouTube video. I've frankly been very busy with a lot of litigation, but I saw a case yesterday that I thought was interesting and thought I would mention it to folks. By way of background, something that comes up very often for my clients, many of whom are domestic violence survivors, is that when they start to talk about enforcing the affidavit of support, their sponsor, the defendant, usually their soon-to-be former ex-spouse, will say something to the effect of, if you enforce this affidavit of support right against me, if you come after me for financial support, then I'm going to report you to the Immigration Service or I'm going to get you deported. Now, I have other videos that talk about why that's usually a hollow threat. As a general matter, whether or not you can be deported is something that's completely up to the federal government and not at all up to your sponsor. So for somebody who already has their LPR status, their green card status, that can't simply be revoked by a sponsor. So usually this threat, if you sue me, I'm going to get you deported, that's just a completely empty threat. But let's leave that aside. I just mentioned that because by way of background, there are a lot of these threats out there as a way of scaring people away from the affidavit of support. What we encounter in this case, called the Pestarino case out of my home state of Washington, it's an appellate case, is a slightly different situation. In this situation, we had a Canadian national, not a client of mine, who was in the process of getting her residency. So she had not yet actually gotten her green card. All of that paperwork had been filed. And according to the published court decision, her US citizen spouse became physically abusive. And in addition to that, one of the things that the US citizen spouse said was, to paraphrase, if you keep giving me a hard time, I am going to withdraw the paperwork that we have filed to get residency for you. So that is a variation on this classic threat that we see abusers use frequently, which is trying to use somebody's immigration status as a form of asserting control over that person. Now, here in Washington State, our domestic violence protection statute actually has a specific provision in there that says you can't, well, it says that it is a factor to consider in a domestic violence protection order if the alleged abuser has made threats to the immigration authority. The reason this is a little bit more complicated is that under the federal regulations behind the affidavit of support, a sponsor actually has a clear legal entitlement to withdraw the affidavit of support. Specifically, they can withdraw the affidavit if they do that in writing before status is granted to the foreign national. So if I've petitioned for my wife, I can withdraw that affidavit of support anytime up until USCIS issues the green card. I can do that for any reason, and I don't need to give an explanation for why I'm withdrawing the affidavit. So this scenario is a little bit complicated because on the one hand, that US citizen petitioner does have a legal right to withdraw the affidavit of support. On the other hand, under Washington's domestic violence protection order statute, you can't threaten somebody's immigration status as a way of achieving coercion. The case isn't super clear on exactly how much and in what way the trial court considered the affidavit of support, but the court did find that there had been physical abuse, but then on top of that the U.S. citizen had used these threats to coerce the DV survivor in that case. So this particular lawsuit and appellate decision does not really say clearly, even here in Washington state, whether it would be the basis for a protection order purely to have a sponsor threaten to withdraw the affidavit of support. Because again, in this case, we had other things going on. We had the actual physical abuse and other threats. And the affidavit of support was considered as part of that. But it does seem to be the case that the trial level court in this case did rely on that threat concerning the affidavit of support as part of the circumstances that justified a protection order in that case. So I think it's not like a really strong data point for this scenario, but it is one more reason to take seriously the possibility that sponsors can get in trouble for making these forms of threat and trying to use the immigration process as a legal threat to get a goal that they want. So overall, a helpful case for people in the scenario that I represent, which is unfortunately a lot of domestic violence survivors who, again, very often face legal threats from the sponsor. And to repeat it one more time, the most important thing to hear if you are in the situation of being a non-citizen who's thinking about enforcing the affidavit of support. In that situation where you've got a viable enforcement case, you've already got LPR status. You already have US resident status. In that situation, you do not need to worry about malicious threats from your sponsor undermining your immigration status. I have, in the over 10 years that I've been doing these cases, I have never had a situation where one of my clients faced an investigation, let alone lost their green card. But I've never even had somebody investigated as a result of a sponsor making those sorts of spurious, malicious allegations. Because legalities aside, the federal government is also not stupid. And they understand that when a sponsor is getting sued under this affidavit of support that the person signed, obviously that person's going to try what they can to get out from under that obligation. And USCIS is going to be very skeptical about allegations that are being made by the sponsor. Hope that's helpful. If you have any questions about the enforcement side of the affidavit of support, that is my world. Feel free to reach out at soundimmigration.com or on the YouTube channel. I'm always happy to answer general questions in the comments there. Take care, everyone.